Welcome back to Banterly, everybody. My name is Aidan.
And I'm Aditi.
And this is the Gen Z podcast about pop culture and media by Gen Z, for Gen Z.
What's new in your life?
So J-Lo has crept into my everyday life. I'm sure you know, and I'm sure many of our viewers know that she recently came out with a self-funded musical film on Amazon Prime, where it's just an hour of her singing her new album, This Is Me, ... now.
This is me. Haven't been sleeping well lately. I guess I never have. This is me. When I was little, I used to share a room with my sister.
It's very self-reflective and making fun of the fact that she's been married 3 times and that she has trouble falling in love. And I thought, oh, that's pretty cool that you can laugh about that and make fun of it. But it's very J-Lo, all about J-Lo, 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 which I'm getting the sense that that's just how she is. And the fact that it was self-funded, a movie just about her and her love. And then she came out with a documentary about the making of the movie. And I have not seen that yet. That's on my list to do this week. There's a lot of trending clips on TikTok. One of her in the gym messing up her hair and saying,
taking my hair out like this, it reminds me like when I was 16 in the Bronx, running up and down the block.
Okay, Jenny from the block. We're constantly reminded that Jenny's from the block. And it's silly. It's a silly movie, and I'm excited to watch the documentary.
I also have a history with J-Lo. Not personally. We don't know each other. That's not what I meant. What I meant was I was following the whole Io Adebri. Remember when she hosted SNL?
Mm-hmm.
And then J-Lo was the supporting artist. And then Io, on a podcast, shout out podcasts, a few years ago, said something about how J-Lo's entire career is fake. What was the exact line? I can't remember what it was, but she was basically saying, like, she isn't real. Like, her career...
Her career is one long scam.
Yes, her career is one long scam. And obviously, when this SNL episode was coming out, people pulled this one out of the archives. Don't know how they found it. But apparently, J-Lo, in an interview after that, I think when those documentaries were coming out that you were mentioning, she made it seem like, oh, Io came to me like crying and apologizing, and she was so upset, and, you know, we're okay now. And I was like, all you had to say was she apologized. You didn't have to be like, oh, she was crying and everything. That's crazy.
That makes sense for J-Lo. And one other thing that I'm going to add about the documentary that reminded me of is another clip that I just saw today, which really, I got to watch the documentary. But she hired a bunch of people to come be in the movie musical as different star signs. And one of the star signs was played by Jane Fonda. And in one of the backstage clips, J-Lo is like at the director's chair and they're on set. She was explaining to Jane Fonda what thirsty meant in today's context and how that means how you're posting on Instagram to get attention. And then Jane Fonda literally says to her face, oh, like you?
That made it to the movie?
That made it to the movie. Which makes me think, what got cut? If that's in it, what got cut? But,
wow.
J-Lo.
Self-funded and you include a diss to yourself. That's absurd.
Well, I'm sure our topic for today's episode is going to be a fan favorite for a lot of you Gen Zers, because we were going to be talking about one of the more iconic and classic films of our generation, and that is the Twilight Saga. Which leads us into our question of the day. Are you Team Edward or Team Jacob?
I am Team Edward. I rewatch the movies fairly often because I think they're like a fall classic. I think it's a sepia filter on them. But I think when I started rewatching it as an adult, I was like, wow, these two are insanely controlling and like demand so much from her. I don't know. But putting all that aside, I just prefer Edward. I think Jacob was especially very territorial And maybe, hey, he's got that dog in him, right, guys? That one was off the dome. That was funny. She says about her own fucking joke. What? Okay.
That was funny. That was hilarious.
Thank you. Anyway, I think I'm Team Edward. I like him. Yeah. What are you? That was an illogical answer.
I agree. I'm the same way. I'm Team Edward all the way. I've always been Team Edward. I've never been Team Jacob. I don't know if it's because just mythologically, I prefer vampires to werewolves. I felt like Edward, and yes, they're both flawed, but I felt like Edward was more selfless than selfish. I feel like, especially in New Moon, the second movie, he just moves away because he's like, Bella deserves a better life. I just need to remove myself, which was frustrating for Bella, obviously. But I thought Jacob was more this because of me, and he was more self-focused, which they're both obviously a little bit selfish, but I felt like, in general, Edward acted in more selfless ways and really devoted his unlife to Bella. And he's also very easy on the eyes. So that helps. They both are.
What's your relationship to the books?
I don't have a relationship with the books. I have never experienced the books, never felt the books, never touched the books. I've heard they're great, though, but they were never a book that I gravitated towards when I was that age. I was a Percy Jackson, that Maximum Ride. I like those books.
Ooh. Yeah.
Yeah, but I never touched Twilight. Yeah.
I don't know if it was just fabricated in my elementary school or if this was a popular phenomenon, but there was a huge rivalry between Harry Potter and Twilight, and I had such a firm loyalty to Harry Potter that I was like, I vowed to never read Twilight because I would never do that to the books. And obviously now, with everything that's come up about J.K. Rowling, I should have just read Twilight. And I thought about reading it now, but then there's like the hurdle of, now I need to find time to read a book, which I can't do. I wish I could. But I honestly also didn't watch the Twilight movies until pretty late, like late middle school, when I felt like I didn't need as much loyalty to Harry Potter. But I like Harry Potter and me, we were like this, and nothing was going to come between us. Certainly not a book about vampires and werewolves. I was like, Harry Potter, been there, done that. What are you going to give me that they can't? You know, that's what I said at the age of 6.
Yeah. Wait, so I have a question for you. If you watched them later, did you ever get to experience any of them in the theater, or were you too late? Oh my gosh.
You watched them in the theaters?
Yeah, I remember when Breaking Dawn Part 1 and 2 came out, The Line. I feel like, if I remember correctly, and I might be misremembering, but there was a period of time when movie theaters were so crowded you had to wait in line to get a good spot. And I remember for a few movies, my dad would get there early and wait in line for us, and then the other 3 of us would come later. Thank you for doing that, Father. But I'm pretty sure Breaking Dawn were some of those movies, because I definitely have seen many of the Twilight movies in theaters.
I definitely
what an
believe
experience that was. Yeah,
that's crazy. I mean, I did that for Harry Potter. I watched Deathly Hallows for sure in theaters, parts 1 and 2. But
that was another one where they had lines.
Oh yeah, the line was crazy for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I am glad that I ended up getting into Twilight.
I used to love vampires when I was younger. I loved a few things, Barbies, X-Men, Marvel superheroes, and vampires. I loved The Lost Boys is one of my favorite movies. Van Helsing with Hugh Jackman, also a great movie. And so Twilight, right up my alley for that point in my life. But I do have a kind of embarrassing confession I have about when I was younger watching Twilight movies.
Okay.
And this is completely true. I'm not making this up. So don't in the comment section, if you guys comment, don't come for me. I used to love those teen magazines you can find at Walgreens, airports, J14, Pop M, Tiger Beat, where the cover was just a collage of teen celebrities. Miley Cyrus, Selena Gomez, Justin Bieber were always on the covers, as was Taylor Swift. And there was one cover that I saw where it was Taylor Swift, and I think Taylor Lautner was in the image next to her. And the caption was something along the lines of Taylor's big transformation. So my brain read that as Taylor Swift plays Jacob in Twilight. I thought it stopped me in my tracks, and I remember distinctly sitting in my bedroom as a child thinking about that and trying to wrap my head around how the prosthetics and the editing, how they pulled that off. But I was amazed. Oh my, I know we talked about Taylor Swift last week, but I was like, girl, you are amazing. Like, that is what the talent in that to turn into a werewolf and a man who has an 8-pack and is a different ambiguous ethnicity than you. That's crazy. I soon learned that was not the case, and Taylor was transforming in some other way, and Taylor Lautner and Taylor Swift are two different people.
How was it revealed to you?
I think, if I'm remembering correctly, it was a picture of Taylor Lautner at the beach not filming anything.
Yes.
Because I was like, oh, that's a different person, because Taylor wouldn't just wear her prosthetics out to the beach. That must be so uncomfortable.
Unless she's just that committed.
What do you think are some common criticisms of this movie series? And do you think they're valid? Do you think they're stupid? Do you think they got a good point?
Well, I'll say I think I was one of the leading critics of Twilight at the age of the aforementioned 6, where I was like, fuck Twilight, you're trying to be the next Harry Potter. No one can do that. I think that was obviously coming from a childish position, but I do remember, even as a kid, before I'd seen the movies, people like shitting on the acting of it and how it was so bad. And like, even watching back on it, I'm like, okay, a few parts of this do feel kind of cringy, and I don't love a lot of the things that are happening. But I think overall it's a very fun franchise to watch.
Watching the first movie was pretty silly, but I feel like you have to take it for what it is. The Rotten Tomatoes on all these movies are not good at all. The critics don't like them. They're not going to win any Oscars, if we're going to go back to the Oscar debate. But they're silly. It's very camp, I felt like. And one of the lines that stuck out to me was, "You better hold on tight, Spider Monkey." Whoa. And just the acting in that first scene when Bella walks into biology and Edward's like, oh, and Bella's like, and just making all these faces. I'm like, whoa, this is over dramatized, but it works because it is like a teen drama. And the acting when Edward and Bella were meeting in that biology class and Edward's making all those faces and Bella's like, what is he doing? And Bella's overall gloominess it's camp. It's a classic movie. It doesn't have to be award-winning acting, but it got the job right, and it's gone down in history. It's also one of the most successful box office franchise, so they were doing something right. Any problematic plot points, storylines that you're like, wow, how did this make it past the writer's room?
Yeah, I have one. And I guess it's also partially a confession. I first maybe watched these movies back in middle school, and I didn't start my rewatching tradition until like college. So it's a recent tradition. But I remember I was going to rewatch these films after a long time, and I was with my friends, and I was like, guys, I gotta say, like, Jasper, really hot. Then one of my friends goes, he's a Confederate soldier. And I was like, what? Because I was like, wait, we're talking about a vampire movie. What? You're just trying to, shit on me for liking this man, which happens a lot with my friends. But then I realized it's literally part of his character that he was a Confederate soldier. And I just find it crazy because in the movie, it's kind of like a one-sentence deal.
What's your name, soldier?
Major Jasper Whitlock, ma'am.
I hope you survive. You may be of great use to me.
Where you just find out that he fought on behalf of the Confederacy, and then you just kind of move on. Like, how does an audience member deal with that? So that for me was a crazy thing to hear.
It flew over my head too when I was watching it. I guess I wasn't paying attention, or honestly, maybe I just didn't know what that meant the first time I watched it, which is so valid to be like 10 years old, like the Confederate Army. And that kind of goes into that interesting piece of journalistic media you sent me today about the writer Stephenie Meyer, the pushback that she had against casting people of color, which is what the first director, Catherine Hardwicke, wanted to do. And like, maybe that was on purpose. She was like, oh, let's make a Confederate soldier and no black people.
I was talking to one of my good friends who's obsessed with Twilight and also generally like vampire and werewolf literature. And she gave me a history lesson of how like Dracula is the first example of a vampire in media.
I am Dracula.
And obviously he's presented, like, it started in Europe, I think. And he's like this man in a castle, and he's like a pale man, but obviously he was a symbol of wealth for what wealth meant for Europe, which was an aristocracy. So if you continue portraying a vampire as someone to have that kind of status, if you extend that from Europe to America, it would be in the lens of being a Confederate soldier and being part of the population who's trying to reinforce the institution of slavery in the United States. So if Stephenie is being a historian about this, then maybe that's what she was trying to achieve by making that his background. But I also remember in the Vampire Diaries, if you ever watched that, they have a similar thing where Damon was also, I think, a Confederate soldier. So I do think that there's like a pattern of showing vampires as horrible people in the past, just because I think that's maybe what the legend is. But yeah, that was just a brief little history lesson on vampires. Are there any other problematic moments?
Another one for me that I fully didn't grasp. I actually put a Instagram questionnaire on my close friend story today to kind of get people's opinions on Twilight. Overall, very positive things. One of my friends commented that the imprint thing was actually foul. And I was like, oh, the imprint thing. And I remembered loosely about what it was. When I first watched it, I didn't really get what imprinting meant. I thought that it literally meant like he stamped her with that tattoo that they all have. It's like, oh, he imprinted her, like he gave her a tattoo. I didn't really understand, but after doing some research today, for anybody who was like me and doesn't really know, and Jacob actually did a phenomenal job explaining it in the movie, so maybe I just wasn't paying attention, but it's when when werewolves can choose to connect with somebody and kind of becomes their soulmate, or in the sense with Jacob and Renesmee, who is Edward and Bella's daughter, more of a protector / brother figure who, according to Twilight Wikipedia, once she becomes of age, then they become romantic, which they didn't cover in the movie, because I remember that scene where Jacob was like, oh, I imprinted. And Bella was like, you imprinted on my daughter? You nicknamed her after the Loch Ness Monster? And and then he was like, no, it just means I'm going to be protecting her and be her brother. But still weird that she was a baby. And there's this kind of connotation that means that's your soulmate and she's a baby. And that also flew over my head.
No, that's one of the other things that when I first watched it, I don't think I batted an eye. I was like, oh, that's sweet. Like, he's going to protect her daughter and they're going to stay connected, blah, blah, blah. But I do think I realized it probably that same moment I realized about Jasper. Like, this is weird. Like, it's just a really weird thing. Can I also just briefly mention that baby looked crazy?
Oh, Renesmee is one of the craziest CGI things in the entire world. She creeps me out.
Did they not have the Harry Potter budget? This is from the same time period. And I feel like the CGI in Harry Potter is fantastic. Not to continue this feud that I started in 2008, but my God, so bad.
I remember a little bit ago the doll that they used for part of it, the Renesmee doll, went viral on social media, and that thing. It is great. This is the last movie. You're supposed to have the highest budget, and also this came out in 2014. Iron Man, Avengers. There's so many great movies.
So many
with
things.
Amazing CGI that were coming out. Like you said, Harry Potter, Avatar. It was 2009.
Avatar.
Where's the budget?
Oh my God.
Where's the budget?
Literally.
So that was Renesmee silly. The imprinting was definitely silly. Anything else for you jump out?
Yeah, I actually have one more controversy I'd like to discuss. Something I didn't know while I was first watching these movies, but obviously there's a lot of representation of I mentioned this earlier, of the Quileute people through Jacob's family and the werewolves. And they use like their symbolism, and a lot of their history is mentioned. And I did some research on it, and they use a lot of their history in this movie, but they were never compensated for any of it. And I need to read into it a little bit more, but they are asking and trying to find a way to get more money from the movies, which obviously, as you said, have broken box office records. And I'm sure they continue to make residuals off of the movies playing on fucking Freeform or whatever they call ABC Family now. But I just think it's crazy to profit off of this group of people and use so much of their entrenched history in this movie franchise, and then like now they're seeing none of the benefits. Like, they were just used for this movie and then discarded in a way, which is wild. I feel like that's wild.
Yeah, and I also had no idea about that. And they could have at least cast a Native American person to play Jacob, because I know that Taylor Lautner's ethnicity has been he's probably the definition, the poster child for me for ethnically ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
But
Same.
I always just assumed that he was Native American because the other actors were, but no, he's apparently Dutch, French, German, Japanese, and he claims to have a little bit distant, he calls it Native American ancestry on his mother's side. So, take with that what you will.
Heart beats fast, colors and promises.
One last thing that I wanted to talk about that was brought to my attention from my friend today when I told her that we were doing a Twilight episode. She was like, oh, you need to talk about how the directors kept changing. Another thing that I had no idea about, but apparently a very shortened version of the story is the director Catherine Hardwicke directed the first movie, and the first movie only. And she's come out since. There was a Daily Beast interview with her in 2018 where she was basically saying that she was only hired to be the director at that time because the network thought that movie was going to flop. They didn't put much attention to it. They didn't give her a huge budget for it, which for her allowed her to take a lot of creative steps. And looking back on them, the first movie definitely feels more like an indie film and more of a artistic film versus Breaking Dawn Part 2, which feels more like a blockbuster superhero movie.
Mm-hmm.
So they definitely have different vibes. But since that job, Hollywood kind of labeled her difficult, and the network, all they did was give her a little cupcake after she became the director at the time with the highest grossing movie from a female director. And she thought, when this happens to men directors, they get all these deals and more pictures and all this. She got a little cupcake, and then it was hard for her to get work afterwards. And the network has said that the reason that they said that there were creative differences that caused her to not come on. And she agreed with that to an extent, saying that the direction she wanted to take it was not the direction that they wanted to take it. But she also had some issues, as we've alluded to a little bit, with the issues is a big word, but creative opinions with the author, Stephenie Meyer, because Hardwicke wanted to make the movie a lot more diverse. She wanted to make Alice Japanese. She wanted to have more vampires of color. But Stephenie Meyer, who I guess grew up Mormon, had said, quote, to her that she had not really written it that way. And the only person that they were able to get, they had people of color. Hardwicke was able to add them in as Bella's friends. But the only vampire that was a person of color was Laurent, who was the black one, who Stephenie was like, finally like, okay, fine. Because I guess Hardwicke said that he was described as having olive skin in the book. And Hardwicke was like, hey, there's black olives. Direct quote from her. So good for her. But even then, that vampire was described, I guess, in the script as scary, antagonistic. And that's the black one? So sounds like that writer had some opinions, but it is interesting to see how this movie was such a success, and people like us have said that the first movie is the best movie, but she was not given the credit, and she was not given more work after this. And she talked about all the other directors that they ended up choosing were men, and she talked about other female written pieces about women that are directed by men, like Big Little Lies, Sharp Objects. It's a sad but common theme in the industry, and I had no idea that it was in this franchise.
I didn't either, and it's deeply upsetting to hear. And the first movie is clearly the best one. All right, well, the two of us, we took, classically, a BuzzFeed quiz that figured out which Twilight character we are. So, Aidan, why don't you read out what your result was and the little blurb that follows?
Here we go. I'm quite surprised and quite shocked at how accurate this response for me is. Let me read it. So my character that I got was Alice Cullen, which probably, other than Anna Kendrick's character, which I thought was hilarious, would be probably my second favorite character, Alice, one of Edward's sisters. And the description goes as follows. Since you're the best dressed among your friends, you must be Alice Cullen. People can't get enough of your high energy personality, always lifting everyone's spirits when they're down. And it's not your fault. You like the finer things in life. It's not terrible to be a bit materialistic. Quality matters. If you know me even a little bit, they hit the nail on the head with that one. That's crazy.
That's really so did. Funny. I love that so much. That was so good. I do like Alice a lot. She was always one of my favorite characters. She's so fun.
She's a ray of light. She's always supported Bella as a positivity, and she's one of the smartest people in the Cullen family, I think. She's always thinking ahead because she has that gift, but also because she's a smart cookie.
Exactly. What
was yours?
So I'm Victoria, which we might remember is a villain. However, I will say I agree with this description. No one better cross you, mess with you, and it's a death sentence. You're not one to play games and are willing to do whatever it takes to reach your goals, no matter how bloody it can get. But life doesn't always have to be filled with hate, just blood. Lots of blood.
Wow.
We have opposite vibes, one would say.
We do, but hey, that's what makes this podcast so interesting. We bring different things to the table. I bring great outfits, positive, high energy, and you bring
blood, apparently.
Blood.
Lots of it. That's a fun vibe for me to bring on this podcast. I will say, we talked about in the One Day episode how I am very goal driven, and I'm like very one track mind when it comes to that. So I think I see where this is coming from. I am a competitive person, but I'm not a villain. I hope. You're always a villain in someone's story. Isn't that a Tumblr quote? I don't know.
That's something that Bella Swan would say.
Absolutely.
You're always a villain in someone's story. And then she'd look off.
I'm trying to channel that Twilight Tumblr aesthetic. That's why we pulled out the BuzzFeed. We're curating a vibe in this episode.
We're curating the vibe that Catherine Hardwicke curated in the first movie and the first movie only.
Absolutely. And that is the legacy that we hope to continue. All right, well, let us know your thoughts on the Twilight Saga.
Share your thoughts with us at Banterly at immigrantlypod.com and engage with us on our socials at Immigrantly Media on Instagram and at Immigrantly Podcast on TikTok.
Banterly is produced by Shay Yu, written by the co-hosts Aditi Misra and Aidan Taylor. The executive producer and editorial review is done by Sadia Khan.
Additional music is by Epidemic Sound.
See y'all next week.